What's the deal with half scale? How do I turn this into my size? Today for Tricky Thursday, let's talk about what's the deal with half scale. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Trisha. I'm the owner of Creative Costume Academy. I have made it my mission to take that stigma away from learning pattern making and prove that you can have fun learning it and take these tips and start using it right away. Today for Tricky Thursday, we're talking about half scale patterns. What the heck? What's the point of them? If you've been following other pattern makers, you may have seen these half scale patterns being put to use, and maybe even the quarter scale, third scale. Like, why are we using half scale? What's the point? And do I use this to make a pattern in my size? Is that how it works? First of all, no, that's not how it works, but let's get into it. So the reason that you see a lot of pattern making teachers using half scale patterns when they're using demonstrations is because it's a great way to learn about pattern making. Why? How does making something that fits my doll explain how something's going to fit a real life-size person? The coolest part about pattern making is that there are rules that you learn when you start learning pattern making that work on any pattern. So by using the half scale pattern to learn these rules, to test them out, to do different exercises, once you can do it in the half scale, you do the exact same steps to a pattern in your size, and it'll work exactly the same way. So it's a really great way to use a smaller little pattern, use less resources, less paper. It's easier to draft out something that's maybe a little larger, like a jacket or a coat or a big skirt, using a half scale pattern, because it's only gonna take half the amount of pattern paper that it would normally take if you went to full scale. So for learning purposes, it's really great because you're learning all the same steps. Now, the measurements are going to be cut in half. If you're going to add an inch to your side seam, then you're going to add a half inch in the half scale, and that would be to scale. I know, I'm throwing in numbers. Don't get scared. Stay with me. But the great thing about doing it in half scale is you can try all of these different things. You can make mistakes and go, oh, that was totally the wrong way. And you've only used a little bit of your resources. You haven't made a whole big ball gown out of all this expensive fabric, yards and yards of fabric, to have it not work. You've only used a little bit of fabric and realized it didn't work. Wouldn't you rather realize it didn't work using just a little bit before you get into that very expensive fabric that you love? So that's why we use half scale patterns. The other reason is it's really accessible and it's really easy to get on camera to show you how it works, because that's the greatest thing is by me doing all the steps and showing you all the steps on my little half scale pattern, you can easily follow along. You can see it in the full frame. It's easy for me to show you, and then you can follow along with me with your little half scale pattern and learn all the steps that you're going to move this over here. You're going to add this seam allowance here. And then when you've figured it out, when you've tested it and made all your mistakes and tried everything with your little pattern, then when you feel confident to move on to a pattern in your size, you're not going to be wasting as much of your fabric, as much of your paper, and you're going to be ready to take on a bigger pattern piece. So it just makes learning much easier. Plus, I'd like to introduce you to Susie. This is Susie. She's my little half scale dress form. And all of these half scale patterns are made for her. They fit her. So you don't need to have a half scale dress form to learn pattern making. I want to reiterate that. You do not need to have a half scale dress form to learn on your half scale patterns. But the great thing about having a little half scale dress form is when you're testing out different designs, like, did I make the skirt full enough? Is this the bustier line that I want to go for? When you're testing out different designs and different patterns that you've never tried before, I still do this for when I make complicated costumes and I don't want to waste all the paper. I don't want to waste all the time. It takes a lot more time to test test out a pattern in full scale, in full size. So I can do it in my little half scale size, and then I can see, are the proportions right? Are they hitting in the right spot on the body? So it really helps me to visually see if a pattern is working or not. When you're learning and you're learning the basic steps and you're learning the basic principles, you don't necessarily need to see it on a body. Of course, it's always nice. And look, she's adorable, right? So are all of her little clothes. She knows. Don't worry. But it is really handy tool to have this half scale version that you can test out, because again, all the steps that you would take to take this basic sloper and turn it into a bustier pattern like this, I would do all those same steps, try it out, see how it fits Susie in the half scale. And then if it worked, if the steps that I took worked on the half scale, then I can go to my full size sloper and do the exact same steps, not the same measurements, not the same pattern, but the exact same steps, and achieve this look for me, because I started with a sloper that was my size, but then I was able to test it with her. One thing I want to mention about Susie. Susie is size, they call it 8'10". She is not an exact half scale version of me. And she doesn't have to be, because the whole point is to figure out the steps. If you do want to acquire your own little Susie, if you do have one, please let me know in the comments what your little Susie's name is. She loves meeting new friends. But if you want to get your own little Susie, the most important thing is whatever your half scale patterns are that you're using, that's the size of dress form that you want to get. You don't want to worry about what your size is. You can get a bigger or smaller size if you really want to see the proportions and how it would look on a different figure than her. But she's, average, which I know is a horrible term. No one's average. But to get the basic proportions, to get the basic idea of what I want this pattern to look like, or the basic principles and how they work, this basic 8'10" will work great with the patterns that I have. And then I make the patterns that I have fit Susie. I just want to point that out, because I know a lot of people feel like they have to get their half scale dress form, but you don't have to. You don't have to have patterns that are exactly your half scale either. The last thing that I wanted to mention is a lot of my students ask me, okay, great. I figured out how to do the pattern. I figured out how to use my half scale patterns. I know I'm ready to move on to making patterns for myself. How do I take this pattern and scale it up to be my size? That's not how it works. Of course, there is that option. You can try to do that, but this pattern is made to fit Susie, because that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see if I started with a pattern that fit her shape, and I did the series of steps that I wanted to take to create the bustier or whatever design you're working on, if that would work, if I'm thinking about it correctly, then that's how it would work. But if I want to do the exact same steps and make the same pattern for my size, it's going to be a lot easier if I just start with a sloper that's my size. Don't take this and try to scale it up, because if you take this and try to scale it up, it might not be exactly proportionate to your size. It might be a little bit off. Her shoulders might be more square than yours. Her bust might sit in a different position. Her belly might not be the same. Her torso might not be the same length. You're going to run into a lot of fitting problems trying to take a half scale or quarter scale pattern and try to scale it up. It would be much, 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 much easier to find a sloper in your size, to fit that sloper to you. And then once you have a sloper that's in your size, that's meant for a full size person, a real size person from the get-go, you then take the same steps that you took to make Susie's pattern and then do those same steps on your size pattern, and then it will work and likely fit you with minimal adjustments. That's what I always suggest. That's a common misconception. These half scale patterns are used just as an educational tool, as a let's figure this out without having to use tons of our resources. Let's figure this out without having to spread out all over the table, so that we can just concentrate on the task that we're trying to learn, the pattern that we're trying to figure out, and have it be a lot easier to manage. So it's a very great tool. It's something I use all the time in my classes. So if you've taken any classes from me, you're going to learn about the half scale patterns and how we use that and how how it's a benefit to you, but I still even use it in my costume career. If there's a complicated pattern that I'm trying to figure out, I will try it in half scale first, just because it makes sense. I don't want to waste all this time and energy and resources to make it in full scale and then have it not work. Hopefully Susie and I have helped explain some of the mysteries around half-scale patterns and what's the point, how they can be helpful and how they can be useful to you while learning pattern making and having fun. If you want to learn more about pattern making and fitting specifically, I am very excited to tell you that my twice-a-year Fit-abuluos Fit Bootcamp is coming up very soon, where we will be utilizing our little half-scale patterns, seeing them in action, learning all about fitting and how to make clothes that fit you perfectly. It's absolutely free, 5-day fitting bootcamp, and we only offer it a couple times a year. So if you are interested in joining us and learning more about all of those things, check out the link below and join us. Have some fun, make your own Susie clothes, and learn how to make clothes fit your own unique, beautiful body. It's a ton of fun, and I hope to see you there. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, share, do all the things, turn on those notifications so you know when we drop our next video, and I will see you in the next one.